up we have a session that's all about a little magic in a jar. There's something almost miraculous about the way salt, microbes and a little patience can turn simple vegetables into something complex, delicious and gut-friendly. Joining us to share these skills is chef and fermentation expert Clare Heal. Clare is a classically trained chef, a self-taught fermentarian and a freelance food writer. She runs popular hands-on workshops in London and beyond, teaching people how to make their own sauerkrauts, kimchis, kombuchas, kefirs and more. So get ready to roll up your sleeves and discover how to make your own microbiome-boosting sauerkraut. And please join me in giving a warm welcome to Clare Heal.
So delighted to be here. Thank you so much for having me. So I am a chef and a fermenter, and I imagine quite a lot of the experts have spoken about the importance of eating fermented food in gut health. I think we've been increasingly aware of that in recent years, increasingly aware of the effects of the gut on physical and mental health, and fermented food comes up a lot. But I think there's still a fair amount of confusion surrounding it, like what counts, why is it good for you, do you have to buy it, can you make your own? So I want to show you how to make a simple sauerkraut, and once you know how to make that, the world is your oyster and you can basically ferment anything you like. So I think a really good place to start is the question, what is fermentation? So if you asked a scientist, a microbiologist, say, they would have a really specific answer. They would tell you that it is the utilization of carbohydrates by microorganisms in the absence of oxygen. So it's super narrow. If you ask a food or drink producer, they will tell you something a little wider. Their understanding is broader. As a chef, I like to think of it as cooking with microbes. So by cooking we mean changing the taste and texture of our ingredients. Usually we think about doing that by applying heat, but you could equally be using salt or sugar to draw out moisture. You could be using acid to cook something like in a ceviche. You could just be chopping or pounding to change the taste and texture. In fermentation, we are using microbes, so using fungus and bacteria. There are three main types that the foods that we eat and drink, foods and drinks that we come across have as part of their processes. So there is ethanol fermentation, that is yeasts turning sugar into alcohol, that is how we get booze, so beer, wine and cider. Acetic acid fermentation, which is bacteria turning alcohol into acetic acid, so that's vinegars, and it's also at play in kombucha. And then there's what I'm talking about today, which is lactic acid fermentation, which is a whole specific family of bacteria, lactic acid bacteria, turning sugar into lactic acid. So this is a subset of pickling, but unlike, say, a pickled onion or a pickled beetroot, or you buy in the shop, or even the pickled egg that you get at the fish and chip shop, we're not adding acid to the produce directly. So you might make your pickled onion, or even your you'd add vinegar to onions to do that. To make your quick pickled red onions, say, that you might put on top of a taco, you're adding lime juice to your onions. You're always adding the acid to the produce. We're not doing this here. What we're doing, instead of adding acid, we're creating an environment where the bacteria are happy, where the lactic acid bacteria are having a good time, and they make the acid for us. Does that make sense? So there are lactic acid all over the place. What we're doing is a wild fermentation. We're not adding a specific culture, we're capturing what's out there. Lactic acid bacteria in the air, on this cabbage that I've got here, and on my hands as well, on all of our skin as a part of our microbiome. However, there's a lot of other bacteria and microorganisms as well. Things that if I just leave this cabbage here, it's not going to turn into sauerkraut. It is going to go slimy, go mouldy, maybe even make us ill if we tried to eat it. So how can I create an environment where only the friendly lactic acid bacteria survive and the bad bacteria don't? I don't like to make moral judgments about bacteria, but let's call them bad because they don't suit our purposes right now. So two things are crucial here. One, we're adding salt. So the bad bacteria are very intolerant of salt. The lactic acid bacteria, it slows them down a little bit, but they're fine with it. Two, we're getting rid of as much oxygen as we can as we pack it in the jar. So the bad bacteria are what we call aerobic. They need oxygen to survive and reproduce. The lactic acid bacteria, anaerobic, don't need oxygen. So those two little twists, to our enormous benefit, they get rid of all the bad bacteria, they keep the lactic acid bacteria digest the sugar in the produce, they create lactic acid, and that preserves it. Does that all make sense? Excellent. All right, I've got some cabbage. This is cabbage I prepared earlier. It's just finely shredded. That's all it is. White cabbage, cheap, available all year round, super easy to get hold of. There's 500 grams of it here. Does anyone want to hazard a guess? Ballpark, how much salt do I want to add as a percentage of the weight of the cabbage? Anyone want to guess? Right. Sorry?
You got it in the leaflet.
Oh yeah, I've given you the answer already, haven't I? You've got the recipe. Fine. So most people will tell you somewhere between 2 and 3%. So less than 2%, it's not going to be salty enough to keep the bad bacteria at bay. More than about 5% is going to be very salty. So some ferments are 5% or higher. Say soy sauce, preserved lemons, some fermented chili sauces, very high salt percentages. But they're all things that we eat as like small amounts of as part of a condiment or as an ingredient. It's something we want to be able to eat a decent amount of as a side dish or in a sandwich or a salad, say. Between 2 and 3%, enough to keep things safe, not enough to make it ridiculously salty. So I like to split the difference, let's call it 2.5. So for 500 grams of cabbage, I'm going to go 12.5 grams of salt, or rather these are slightly rubbishy scales, so as soon as it says 12 then I'm fine, it's not giving me the half. 11. Good, great, there we go. So it's not that much, like there's a few sprinkles, about a tablespoon for this amount. And I'm going to toss it through. I want to distribute it really evenly. And it's not long before I begin to feel dampness in the cabbage. So for those who remember the GCSE biology, that is osmosis at work. So water is being drawn out of the cabbage by the salt. So this, if we were in a sauerkraut emergency, which it might happen, you don't know, and we need the sauerkraut in the jar like stat, I could really vigorously massage this for a few minutes. What I'm looking for is a little puddle of brine at the bottom of the bowl. If we have a little more time, like I do today, I can just let it sit for 20 minutes or so, although I might keep massaging it just to help it along. So what's happening here, the salt is drawing the moisture out of the cabbage, and I'm just going to get enough brine that when I put it in the jar, it's covered in that salty water that keeps it safe from the bad microbes until the acid is produced by the good microbes. So I'm using Maldon salt, and it's not because I get a sponsorship deal for them, sadly. If anyone knows anyone at Maldon, send them my way. And it's not just because I'm bougie, although there is that too. It's because it is that nice flaky texture which dissolves easily as it brings the water out of the cabbage. So imagine using rock salt, say. It's just going to sit there in its little sort of salty hailstone form for ages, and it won't dissolve and become a brine for a long time. The other thing I don't use is that very cheap free-running table salt, which it's fine, I've fermented with it plenty of times and it's all right, but it contains additives that stop it clumping. So stops it gumming up the little holes in your salt cellar, and those additives tend to be slightly antimicrobial. Yeah. I haven't personally, but I don't see why not. So I'll tell you what we're looking for. So the question, if you didn't hear it, can you use Celtic sea salts? It's not a brand I'm familiar with, but I don't see why not. The only thing you're really looking for is if you look at the ingredients, you want something that just says salt, basically. So whether it's sea salt or pink mountain salt or anything like that, you just want something with no extra additives. Having said that, if cheap table salt's all you've got, ferment away. It's not going to kill everything dead. It's just if you did a side-by-side comparison, you would probably see that the one that you'd done with pure salt was slightly more lively, therefore slightly more microbially diverse, and therefore you'll get slightly more interesting flavours from it. So we've got white cabbage here, just plain old white cabbage. The only thing I'm going to add here is some caraway seeds, which is very traditional as a addition to cabbage all across Eastern Europe, Germany, Austria, the Caucasus, Ukraine, etc. It's a nice little sprinkle just for flavour. Otherwise, I leave it pretty plain, and when I teach workshops, I like people to make their first sauerkraut quite plain too. And that's because I want people to know that in the days and weeks that come when they taste it, that all the change that's happened, all the acidity and umami that's developed, that's as a result of microbial action rather than because of anything they've added. But what I want you to know is that you can do this with any hard vegetable that you can shred or grate, you can make a kraut from. So sauerkraut itself, it translates as sour cabbage. Sauerkraut means cabbage, but I think we're all quite happy with the idea that a kraut is a kind of shredded fermented salad, and you can do that with anything you like. So to your white cabbage, you could add grated carrots and sliced onions, and you have a fermented coleslaw. You could add some jalapenos and some oregano to that, and you would have a curtido, which is a Central American variant, and it's really nice in tacos. You could do it with red cabbage and add maybe some of the spices that you'd use if you were braising that, so cinnamon, say, or star anise, or even juniper berries. Mix in some beetroot with your red cabbage and perhaps add some horseradish, and it'd be delicious alongside roast beef. Or add some spices and it would work nicely as a chutney, and like instead of a chutney on a cheese board. So anything you can shred or grate, you can make yourself a delicious kraut from. And you can add any mixture of vegetables, you can add any spices, any garlic, ginger, chilies, herbs, seeds in there that you like. So the variety is endless. If you grow your own and you've got glutz from the allotment, if you've seen something nice and cheap at the market or in the supermarket, or if, God forbid, there's something that's going a little bit bendy in the salad drawer or veg rack, you know that you can make it into a delicious kraut. So this method, we're grating it, we're adding whatever flavours we like, we're weighing it, 2.5% of the weight in salt, leave it for a little while to draw out moisture, and pack it in a jar. And I'll tell you when I put it in the jar, I'll tell you what we're going to do with it afterwards. So can you see now that there's quite a lot of water coming out of that now. So just a few minutes sitting and massaging, we've got probably like a tablespoon of water at the bottom of the jar. So I'm going to pop this in the jar now. I give this jar at the end, I'm going to give it to whoever asks the most insightful question, I think. But at the end, I also have little recipe sheets for you, and some samples to taste. So these samples that I've got here, I've got a white cabbage kraut, very similar to the one that I'm making now, but with a few extra herbs in it. It's got some caraway seeds and some dill. I've got a golden kraut, which is white cabbage still, but with fennel and carrots, and then turmeric, garlic, ginger, and some spices. And then I've got a red ruby kraut, which is red cabbage, beetroot, and then caraway, fennel seeds, and chipotle. So it's exactly the same method for all of them. Shred or grate, flavour, weigh, add salt, pack them in a jar. Exactly the same method, but you get different flavours, and they go with different things. So I never get bored. My lunch most days is some sort of salad, some sort of protein, and a bit of kraut on the side. And you can, well, as Layla was saying before me, for those who are here for her talk, rotate it. So you're always getting something different. So as I pack it in the jar, you see I'm packing it down. I don't know if the people near the front can see, but as I'm pushing down on it, there's like liquid rising around my fist. So that's all come out of the cabbage itself. We didn't add any extra liquid. There we go. I introduce you now to my corny yet memorable catchphrase, which is, under the brine, everything's fine. So, one day I'll get merch made. Until then, you just have to remember it. But keep that in mind, it will stand you in good stead. So any little brine in the bowl, I'm pouring in there as well. So anything that's under the brine is protected by that, by the saltiness, until the lactic acid bacteria produce the acid, in which case then everything is protected. Now, just to help it along its way, I've got a bit of the outer leaf of the cabbage that I saved from earlier. I'm going to rip that to fit. It can sit on top there. So that is protecting everything. Then I've got a core of the cabbage, and this is going to be my pickle weight. So if you are the sort of person that likes to buy kit for their new hobby, there are all sorts of really beautiful like glass or ceramic pickle weights you can get. But you don't, they're very nice, pleasing objects, but you don't need them. So you can go a quarter, the core of the cabbage quarter, half an onion, the bit of the cabbage leaf. What I sometimes use, especially in large crocks, is like a Ziploc sandwich bag with water or brine in it. And it's not very beautiful, but it sort of moulds itself to the shape of the top of your ferment. You just want anything that kind of keeps the air out, really, and then hopefully also does a little job like weighing down that cabbage, or keeping it all under the brine. So I've got my lid here. I'm going to screw the lid on. As I screw it, the lid pushes on the cabbage core pushes on the cabbage leaf. That pushes everything down to under the brine. So as the lid is on, it's all nice and covered, just by a millimetre, but that's all I need. So what happens now is whoever is lucky enough to take the jar takes it home. You sit it at room temperature for a few days to a few weeks, and it's absolutely up to you how long that is. It depends on your taste. So to sit it at room temperature, in my kitchen I have, in the area that I pretentiously refer to as the fermentarian, which is really just an area of workspace in one corner, I've got a few of those nice little trays that go under window boxes. So, a couple of quid from the garden centre, inch high, and all my jars sit in there in a nice little line. And then if they leak, it's not going to ruin my work surface. But so I would say, if it's quite full, put it on a tray, a saucer, in a Ziploc bag, anything like that that's just going to protect things if it leaks. And every couple of days, I'm going to open it, and we might hear a little kind of foot of gas escaping, because the same bacteria that produce the acid, they also produce carbon dioxide. So we can tell everything's getting started there. And also every few days you're going to get a fork in there, taste a few strands of cabbage. And then it's ready when it's as sour as you like it. So for some people that's maybe a week, few days to a week, and you've still got some fresh sweet cabbagey taste in there, but it's beginning to get acidic. For other people, quite kind of nuclear sour, and that's probably more like 2-3 weeks. The warmer the weather is, the quicker the microbes are going to work. We're cooling down everything now, so I would say probably 2 to 3 weeks for this. In the summer it can be ready in as little as a week. And then when it's as sour as you like it, it goes in the fridge. So the fridge doesn't stop it completely, but it slows it right down. And then it will stay perfectly happily for as long as you need it to. Hopefully not that long. I hope you will eat it before then. But the crucial thing to remember is that once everything is under the brine, it's safe. The acid is then produced, makes it even safer. Once the acid has been produced, it basically will keep forever. White cabbage stays really nice and crunchy for a long time. I've found jars of sauerkraut at the back of my fridge that have been there for a year, and they're still delicious and crunchy. Very, very sour, but still really nice. The one thing that might happen if you use softer vegetables, so say Jerusalem artichoke loses its crunch a bit quicker, carrots do sometimes even, is it won't have gone off, it will still be perfectly safe to eat, but it might have gone a little bit soggy. So the crucial thing I always think when you're making your own is to taste it often and eat it whilst it's delicious to you. So I think there's lots of lovely things available in the shops, especially like small artisanal brands, and you can read the jar and they'll read really nicely. They've got all sorts of exciting ingredients in them. And sometimes I get them home and they're delicious, and sometimes I get them home and I can't taste anything except acid there. Whereas if you make your own, it won't have been sitting for quite so long. Those things have been sat in the producer's places for a couple of months, then in the deli for a couple of months. It's all within its safe date. It's going to be safe forever. It's just maybe gone a little bit acidic, a little bit soggy, and it's not terribly interesting anymore. Whereas if you make your own, you can add whatever you like in terms of herbs and spices, in terms of mix of vegetables, and you can eat it when it's at its absolute peak. So, just to reiterate, you are finely chopping or grating your vegetables, you are adding any flavourings that you like, you are weighing everything together, you are adding 2.5% of that in terms of salt, massaging or leaving to get some brine, packing in a jar, removing as many air pockets as you can to get rid of places where the bad bacteria might be hanging out waiting to get some oxygen, and making sure everything is under the brine, and then you are packing it down tight, leaving it at room temperature until it's as sour as you like it. Job done. Super, super easy. I think sauerkraut is most people's gateway drug into the world of fermentation. So easy, you can make it however you want, and then once you're there, you could get started on kimchi and a whole range of pickles and all sorts of other things. So, I'm going to ask for questions in a minute. I've got recipe sheets here for anyone who wants them. On there is my website and my newsletter address. In the archive of my newsletter are many, many, many different recipe ideas, so I hope you'll have a go at some of those. I've also got samples for you to try, so help yourself to those. But before, any questions? Yes, Lou.
Do you have to sterilise that jar?
Great question, thank you for asking. So you totally can. You can do it in a hot cycle in the dishwasher, you can put it in the oven for 100 degrees for 20 minutes. Do what I do, which is not bother. So it's not like making jam where you've created a sort of mould playground of moist sugariness. And if you don't sterilise it, you're in trouble. We've specifically created an environment that is hospitable only to the microbes that we want to facilitate. So yeah, cleanliness very important, sterility not so much. Yes.
When you put it in the fridge, do you still have to open the lids to release the carbon dioxide? I know it slows down quite a lot. But
by the time it's going to go in the fridge, probably most of the carbon dioxide that will have been produced. So when you put it in the fridge, it's not going to explode or anything. It's never going to explode anyway, and to make that very clear, the what we call burping, which is very uncouth, but that's the opening it to let the gas out. It happens mainly at the beginning, is the bacteria that produce a lot of gas. And it's not going to all blow up. It's not like home brewing, where you might be making something quite explosive. I had a bad accident with some elderflower champagne last year. We don't speak of it. But it's not like that. That's not going to happen. The kraut itself might absorb some of the gas and become slightly weirdly fizzy, which isn't very nice. And also it might leak. So that's the main issue really, is the leaking. So don't worry too much about the burping, and no, once it goes in the fridge, you'll find it. No, please help yourself.
What about kefir? Can you just run us through quickly about how you would make your own kefir?
Sure, yes, absolutely. So kefir is a slightly different process, although there are lactic acid bacteria involved. So this is a wild fermentation. So we've got our microbes from the air, they were on the cabbage itself, they were on our hands. Kefir is a cultured fermentation, so you need to get hold of some kefir grains, which are not grains like wheat or rye or anything. They are little collections of the scobies, in fact, if anyone's heard that phrase before, usually with kombucha. So it's a symbiotic culture of bacteria and yeasts. And whereas a kombucha SCOBY is a sort of flobbly looking flat thing, kefir grains are like little cauliflower florets. So you put them in your milk and leave it overnight, or for 12 hours if your kitchen's quite warm. You can either open it, in which case the yeasts proliferate and you get a kind of yeastier taste to it, or you can shut the jar airtight, in which case the lactic acid bacteria proliferate and you get a more sort of yogurty flavoured kefir, so I prefer it that way. Leave it overnight. In the morning, you strain it through a sieve. People will say don't use metal, but it's fine, it's only in contact with it for a few seconds. Strain it through a sieve, get your little cauliflower floret grains back out again, put them in some new milk, start the process again, and the thing that you've strained, it will have thickened up a little bit, it will be tangy, and you can either eat that immediately, or I prefer to chill it overnight, and for its second fermentation it'll thicken a little bit more, and during that bit, now it's not in contact with your grains, if you wanted you could put in flavours there, so some fruit or some lemon juice or some honey, anything like that. So for me it tends to be, it's two containers, one with the milk and the grains, one with the strained kefir in the fridge, and then they're sort of rotating through it. anything really, but glasses. Like, I tend not to use plastic for anything of these because you get stuff caught in any scratches. So glass is good. Yeah, absolutely.
Can I ask, can you feed them coconut milk?
Kefir. So not okay. So normal dairy kefir grains, you can feed them other alternative milks, but they get, and that works quite well. It never thickens up, but it gets like a tangy drink that you can put on cereals or something. After a few goes of that, the grains tend to get a little bit unhappy and they want normal milk again. Water kefir grains, on the other hand, which are a whole different collection of microbes, and instead of cauliflower florets, they look like tiny little jewels. You can feed coconut milk, and they quite like it because what they want is sugar water, basically, at a sort of 4% sugar to the water, which happens to be more or less the exact range of coconut milk. So you can make very delicious water kefir with coconut milk, but I wouldn't advise putting your normal dairy kefir grains in coconut milk.
We historically think of sauerkraut coming from Eastern Europe and Germany and so. Was there something that was done in the UK historically? Did we do anything similar?
Really quick question. We do have a fermenting culture in the UK, but in sort of the last few hundred years, it hasn't been that focused on lactose things. So we have vinegars, we have mustards, we have yogurts and stuff. In Scotland, they have sowens, which is like fermented sort of porridge almost, and you can eat the solids or drink the watery drink. So yeah, we haven't had much of these things, but if you do look at historical cookbooks like Hannah Glass, say, which is maybe what's that, about 400 years old, she has got recipes for things which are clearly fermented. They don't necessarily refer to it as a ferment, it's a pickle, and they might be calling it a pickle, or they might be calling a vinegar thing a pickle, and they're not really making the distinction between. Piccalilli, say, the original piccalilli, inspired by spices brought back from India and stuff, and made in, I think, I want to say 16th century, but don't hold me to that, like that would have been fermented. So, but definitely fell out of favour over the last kind of 100 years or so. So it feels like we're newly discovering this stuff, but yeah, I don't think it didn't exactly exist as it was, but there would have been fermented things around. Peas porridge, I think, the peas porridge hot, peas porridge cold in the pot 9 days old, like that would have undergone a fermentation. And there's lots of things that were, but we didn't necessarily think of them as that.
Thank you so much for that great presentation. Very excited to make some sauerkraut. Have you ever tested the sauerkraut you've made to see how many bacteria cultures are in there at the end of the fermentation?
Oh, I would love to. I personally haven't, but I am in the Guild of Fermenters, which is a real thing, and not something I made up. We've got a coat of arms and everything, and we are currently working with some labs, so hopefully that will make microbial testing available to more of us at a reason, because basically the reason I haven't is because it's incredibly expensive. So hopefully we have a partnership with some labs coming up, and I will be able to do that. Although I think some of the other members have. There's plenty you can read about it. I would recommend a book called Of Cabbages and Kings, which is by a chap called James Reed, who makes the kimchi brand. Really lovely book, and it goes quite deep in the history and culture of various different ferments, sauerkraut, kimchi, soy sauce, kefir, etc., but also gives you quite a lot of information about the microbes involved. So for what we're doing, it's all lactic acid bacteria, but there's it's almost a tag team throughout the process. So the first ones that get involved produce a lot of gas as well. So they're all there in some form or another. Some of them are there, but some of them are there in very small numbers. But as it gets more acidic, then a group that likes a more acidic environment proliferates, sort of takes the baton from the first group and carries on. So as the environment within the thing changes, so the microbial makeup of it will change.
So this might be the same question. Where do the bad microbes go?
They just die. Like the lifespan of an individual microbe is very, very short, like a matter of hours. So once you create an environment where they can't survive, those will die, and crucially they won't have been able to reproduce. So when we're talking about the microbes that are living there, it's not like one and we can follow its journey.
So they're not the gas that comes out when you open them.
Oh no, that's carbon dioxide which is produced by the ones that are alive.